Us working.
Ooh, you guys just went out of focus.
It's because of the lane.
There we go.
Perfect. All right. Audio's good?
Should be.
Feedback?
We good?
It's delayed, so.
Yeah, it should be
But
good.
you can get started.
Alrighty. Well, why don't you take us away, Janna? We don't want to take too much of your time.
So I'm Janna Dorman, and I'm Skyping from my phone right now, so if it moves around, I apologize. And I work for Allina Health, which is a nonprofit healthcare organization in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, so I live in Minneapolis. And Allina Health has 12 hospitals and over 70 clinics and hospital-based clinics, so it's a really large healthcare organization in the Twin Cities area. And my role there is I am a web-based training developer, which is a really fancy word for I develop e-learning training. And I develop the training for the electronic medical records, so I'm doing software training. And you might be wondering, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions, but how that relates to what you're studying, and hopefully we can make those connections. But before I worked for Allina, I went to grad school with Kylie, and we also went to undergrad together. So I went to Iowa State and got my master's in rhetoric, composition, and professional communication. And then I worked for a year in Cedar Rapids for a small training company, also doing e-learning development. So that's kind of my initial background. But I kind of wanted to ask what you guys are doing. So I'm assuming you are doing some sort of rhetoric professional communication major, but are you guys undergrads, mostly graduate students? What are you studying? So let's start with that. So who's an undergrad, if you want to raise your hand? Oh. Someone already fell.
Doing great. So we've got one on this side,
One undergrad.
two on this side.
Okay, and who is a graduate student? Okay.
And then the one over here. Yes.
And one online.
Good.
The one
Okay.
online. Our program is TC centric.
Okay, so
But lots of rhetoric emphasis for everyone.
and you might not think instructional design, which I'll also kind of explain what that is, relates, but I think it's totally an appropriate jump. And so what am I talking about today? So I kind of wanted to, so you know a tiny bit about my background, but how does what I do interact or intersect with grad school? So, my other question is, who is interested in continuing their education, and who's interested in getting a job after they graduate? So who is interested in maybe going to furthering their education, going for more school after they graduate, whatever degree they're in? Anybody?
Like Kristen, right? On the fence,
I'm
yeah,
at the
there
end
was
of
a
the
couple on the fence.
I'm at the end of the line, so it doesn't count.
All right, and then, so it looks like the rest of you are kind of more interested in maybe getting a job after you graduate that's not dedicated solely to academia. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, fair.
Which is, so I'll be totally honest, when I started my master's degree, I showed up on that first day and I was like, I am going to get my PhD. And then I went to 2 weeks of class and I was like, no, I didn't. So, how my job intersects with grad school is that a lot of what I learned was visual and information design. So how you lay things out on a page, how do visuals make sense to your audience? And that is a lot of what developing e-learning is. So deciding how to lay out a course visually is really related to information design. But also, I really think one of the biggest things that applies from grad school is thinking critically and thinking differently and using rhetoric in my everyday world, which a lot of times I think rhetoric is so theoretical that it's hard to think about how we can bring that down into the real, into our everyday lives. But using rhetoric, I've been able to expand my job role. So my job title is very limited. What my job title actually is I literally am supposed to get a storyboard from somebody who's developed or designed the e-learning for me, and I'm literally just supposed to manually create that, right? I'm just supposed to use software and develop the e-learning, and I'm not really supposed to have any further input. But using skills I've learned with rhetoric, just how to communicate to people, how to understand the audience, I was able to get promoted within 1.5 years of working where I work, and I've been given other roles outside of my job title, which has been really exciting. So those are the big things, and you can come back and talk about that. Also, if you guys have any questions, just raise your hand, or if nothing I'm saying makes sense, just let me know. So those are some of the ways that my job intersects with kind of what I learned in grad school, but I'll talk a little bit about what my job looks like. So I work on a team of 22 people, and I work in a corporate setting. So as you can see, I have a gray cube. It's large. I sit in a desk. It's a stand desk, so that's exciting. But I work on a team of 22 people, and most of those people do instructor-led training. So they're in the classroom every day. They're because how many of you are any of you doing like a teaching assistantship? So it's actually a lot like teaching. It's not like teaching undergrads because you're teaching adults who are being trained for their jobs. So they're not there to learn. They're not there. They're there to learn a very specific skill. And so most of the people that I work with are training in the classroom. I develop the e-learning, but most of my time consists meeting with subject matter experts, so meeting with people who really know the software. And when there's been identified for an e-learning, I meet with the subject matter experts to figure out, is e-learning the best solution? Would this better be made into a job aid, or would our end users benefit from an instructor-led course? And so I spend a lot of time doing that, but I also spend a lot of time, I do a lot of software simulation videos, so capturing the software on the screen with narration and editing that. And I also do a lot of capturing screenshots and making like a practice exercise. If you've ever seen anything online like that where you're simulating the software, I develop that. But I'm also part of an instructional design group as a whole through our whole department, and we've recently been creating a design and style guide that will be implemented department-wide. And so I'm not just doing e-learning work, I'm also doing instructional design work, which is basically what does your audience need when there's been a need identified for training, and what's the best solution for that. So that's kind of what my day looks like on a regular basis. It's a lot of meetings, or it's a lot of sitting alone in my cube. And I live in a cube, so there's a lot of cubes here. Does anybody have any questions about that so far, or anything they want to add?
Could I ask, how much is your time devoted to researching versus writing versus implementing, or what's that breakdown like?
Sure. So what do you mean by is that Kylie speaking?
Yeah.
So what do you mean researching? Do you mean like researching instructional design principles, or just researching what our end users need?
Kind of all of it, but mostly like how do you collect the material you need to produce your stuff?
Sure. So that's hard because it's kind of dictated by project. So my manager will decide, okay, Janna, we're going to work with this person, our team, to develop the learning. So I will really look to that person to provide that expertise. But I probably spend 30% of my job actually developing e-learning. So like sitting in front of my computer alone, taking a storyboard and actually making it into what you would see as an end product. But I also spend probably about 30% of my time meeting with subject matter experts on our team. That's what I would consider my research, is meeting with them to better understand what we need. But I also spend a lot of time, actually, we have test environment for the electronic medical record, and I will spend a lot of time on my own in that, looking for what I need. So you do have a lot of opportunity to do some research, but it's a bit different academic research, because you have very target focused research specific to a project and specific to what your manager is asking you for, compared to when you're writing a paper and you get to pick the topic, and the topic you can Google or you can go to the library. You know, I have a couple of resources I can use within my organization, so it's pretty different from doing research that you might be used to. Cool. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Yes.
What's the best thing you love about your job?
The best thing, I have 5 weeks of vacation.
Jesus. 5?
That is super nice.
Wow.
That's
How
always
did you do that? Did you negotiate when you started working? Is that something we should do, like, during the interview process?
Yes.
I'm kidding.
That,
Oh,
She asked if you negotiated for it during getting the job. Was that something that you needed?
sure. So that's something that Kylie asked me to talk about a little bit later, is my advice for graduates, and it really depends. I work for a large company. There's over 20,000 employees. There's virtually zero negotiating on benefits like that. You can negotiate for your salary, you know, you can ask, but you're not negotiating even with your manager when you get hired. You're negotiating with an HR representative who has no idea what your value is. And so, but I'll talk about that a little bit later, about the pros and cons of small versus a large company, because they're very different and they have very different pros and cons. But another thing I love about my job is that there is a lot of opportunity our corporate job to do big projects, and so I really like that. But I really like training, because to me it still feels like learning, but it's in a different context than academia. So I really like being able to still learn and still help other people learn, but it's not at a university, so I really like that. That's a hard question, what's the best thing about the job? But I also get to work from home once a week, so that's great too. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. So when you're working with the subject matter experts and you're having these meetings, how often do you meet in person versus virtually or phone call? How does that go?
That's a good question. So I work, because of where I work, it's a local company, right? We only work in the Twin Cities area, and so I think that's kind of unique for what we do, but I mostly with people in person. The only time I really would meet with them virtually is if they're working from home, and I typically will schedule that because it's just easier to work in person. But if you work in a company where people work in different cities, I would say that would probably be a higher percentage. But for me personally, I mostly just meet with them in person. And it depends on the project, because my subject matter experts are also training, so how often I meet really works around their schedule. And so, but usually about once a week, once every other week per project. So I have meetings with people throughout the week on a regular basis, but that's a good question. So, and I think I heard somebody else start to ask the question.
Yeah, it was me. How do you think that having the teaching assistantship in your graduate work was valuable to the job, like in what you have to do now, like talking with SMEs or like running instructional or developing and then testing instructional materials? Did that translate well into your current position?
Yes, definitely. I will be completely honest. I hated teaching. I hated it. But what it did do is it taught me that I didn't like teaching, but it gave me, because I don't have a background in instructional design besides my teaching assistantship.
Okay.
And that really, really gave me a leg up when I was interviewing, especially for what I do, to say, I understand how adults need to learn. I have taught in the classroom before. I have a skill set that for what I'm doing. So yes, I definitely think it's valuable, even if that's not what you end up wanting to do. For me on multiple levels. One, because it taught me, which I think is valuable, that I didn't want that forever, but it did give me a full year of experience of here's how to structure room, here's how to work with students, here's how to do research and figure out whether or not something works. So I would definitely say valuable, even if you have no interest in doing it after you graduate. Anybody else?
So, how would you describe your, I guess, philosophy to instructional design, or like your approach to it? Like, if somebody sat down and asked you what's most important to you when you're doing it, what would it be?
Man, you guys are in school because no one asks me this at my job. So it's really, not to get too technical, but I work in a program called Xyleme. I won't get into the specifics of it, but the basis of it is that content is reusable. So you can create a web course, but you can also create a print document from the same exact content. You can copy and paste and link it. And so really my philosophy with instructional design has been, I'm sure you've probably heard of micro-learning, and we're not really doing it well here, but you're building content at these small chunks of what do people really need in order to do their job right now, and building content that way. And so you're kind of stacking content on top of each other to push out this course or push out a reference guide. And so that's probably my approach, is how to break this down small enough that we can reuse it somewhere else, but that it also makes complete sense for the audience who needs it right now. And I also don't know if you've heard of Kathy Moore. Has anybody heard of her?
Nope.
She's really interesting. And it's all adult learning and training based, but all her methods are scenario based. So one of the ways that adult learners learn best is through what do I need to do in order to do my job right now? So it's very practical. So everything she does is based around scenarios and building really realistic, valuable scenarios for end users. And so she would be another person that would be really interesting for you to take a look at.
Could you say her name one more time?
Kathy Moore.
Kathy Moore.
Okay.
She spells with a C, and it's Moore. It's all scenario based, and so I've actually implemented a lot of that. So it's kind of small modular learning, and then using scenarios to help end users see how they can use skills, rather than just giving them information.
Sure.
You're testing what they can do before you give them the information. So,
cool.
If anybody else has questions, feel free. Otherwise, I have a list of advice that I would love to share with you if you're interested in hearing it.
Yes.
So where to start? So is anybody graduating here or in May? Anybody?
Graduate. We
Two.
got looks like all three of the undergrads.
Okay. Congratulations. That's really exciting. Sorry, I've been trying to get rid of this cough. So if you're looking for a job, most of my advice is going to apply to applying for a job outside of academia. And my first thing that everyone will tell you is to create a strategic resume, right? So you don't necessarily want to use the same resume for every job, but I would also tell you don't go too far on creating a custom resume for every job, because my other piece of advice, you need to apply for a lot of jobs, a lot of places, because your first job, you're not really going to be able to be picky. I wasn't. I worked for a year in Iowa at this really small company, and it was a great learning experience. I learned a ton, but I also really learned what I did not want to do in a job. And so, yeah, first piece of advice would be to create a strategic resume, which is very focused on the job you're applying for, but also don't feel like you need to include every single job you've ever had. That's what I mean about strategic, is create something that applies so that all of your experience is gearing towards why you're qualified for that job. So if you had a cashier job that you would like to put on your resume, make sure that the skills and the job duties that you include directly, those skill sets can apply to the job you're applying for, if that makes sense. So my other advice is, if you are looking for a job, is to create a story that you can tell when you interview, because I'll be honest, when I was interviewing for my second job, I wanted to move to Minneapolis. I would get a lot of phone interviews, and then they would ask me how I got into instructional design, and I would literally start with, well, I got it as teaching assistantship in grad school, and I hated teaching. And people didn't really want to hear that, right? They don't want to hear that you hated teaching, or, and so I wasn't getting further in my interviews. And when I took a step back, I realized it was because of the story that I was telling. I wasn't telling a compelling story of how I landed in instructional design, which was, I figured out that it wasn't for me. I got a different teaching assistantship where I got to help develop professional development courses for an engineer, and I learned how to do e-learning that way, and that's how I found my passion for e-learning. That's a much more compelling story than saying, I hated teaching, so I had to find a different, and that's how I got. So that would be my probably biggest advice, is figure out what's your story. It doesn't have to be cheesy. It doesn't have to be, my life revolves around this job. I want it, but you do have to come up with some sort of story that is compelling, that tells, why you're interested and how you got here. Even if it's, I had no idea I wanted to do this, and then I took a class and I don't know, I'm here. So just figure out what your story is. What else? If you're interviewing, has anybody heard of the STAR method of asking questions? No? That doesn't surprise me if you haven't been in a corporate environment. So the STAR method, you can look it up. It doesn't really matter what it's an acronym, and it stands for situation, task, action, result. And basically it means they're going to ask you a weird open-ended question like, tell me about a time that you encountered conflict. How am I supposed to answer that? What they're looking for is, they want you to give them a situation in which you encountered conflict, the task that you were behind or the conflict that arose, what action you took, and then the result of that action. So they're looking for a specific way that you're answering the question. So when I was interviewing for jobs, I literally wrote out every possible question I could think of that they could ask. I Googled what are STAR questions, and then I just started writing out my answers in a Google document. And then at the time I was long distance with my boyfriend, and we would Skype, and he would ask me a question and I would answer it. And then we would analyze it. I would stop and he would go back and say, I think you could say this instead. So I would encourage you to, if you're looking for a job, to look at the STAR method, but also just practice out loud, because it is hard to go to an interview and sound eloquent and also know what you're saying, especially if they ask you a weird question. So that's kind of like applying jobs. Does anybody have any questions about that or any comments they'd like to add? All right, so I also have, again, because I work in a corporate environment, academia and corporate culture are very different, which they're just very different. Whereas academia, I feel like a lot of times you are more of your own boss. Nobody's really managing your time or watching you, right? Especially if you're teaching in a classroom. It's very different in a corporate setting. Your manager who is in charge of you will directly affect your life is like everything. Whether they're a micromanager, whether they're somebody who likes to gossip, or somebody that you have to, kiss ass, your manager really does affect what your job will be like. And so that is something that I like to just give people a head that if you can make your life easier, that's like 50% job that has nothing to do with your job, right? So I wrote the game is very much real. Another thing is that you think that you're going to come to a corporate company and they're going to have, with Larry, I work in training, you think you're going to get trained in for your job and nobody is going to tell you what to do. You're just going to show up and they'll be like, all right, you got this job, good luck, go for it. But I think that's one of the things that's really valuable about the degree that we have, because I feel like a lot of it is so self-starter. You really do have to just go for it and do a lot of research, work on your own, work independently, and I think that is a skill that really translates well into a corporate environment. One last piece of advice is, as much as you might, I'm not a huge fan of networking. I think it's hard. I think networking, I just think it's hard. But I do think that it's valuable and worth it. And so, for example, what you're at right now, Society of Technical Communication, is a networking event. And I would encourage you to either continue with STC when you graduate, or, depending on what field you go into, joining some sort of professional network. I currently am only in free professional networks just because I am still paying off my loans. And so paying $200 for a professional network is difficult, but I don't know if anybody's heard of meetup.com, but there's professional networks on there. There's Association of Training Developers, ATD. There's local chapters of professional networks everywhere. But that would be big advice, because if you're ever looking for a new job, having a professional network in your back pocket is extremely beneficial. Because it's really hard to get a job online. My last section that Kylie asked me to talk about it was it worth it? Was grad school worth it? I can say honestly that I have been out of grad school for 3 years now, and I can say yes, it was worth it. But I will tell you that it's taken 3 years to get there. Grad school is hard. It is so hard, and it is. It takes a long time to recover from it, I think. I don't know if anybody else is struggling or, has had like a meltdown in their driveway. I had. But I do think it's been worth it. And so, but I can be honest, I've started to finally see the value, and that has come, my biggest takeaway is just my ability to think differently from my peers who have not gone to school. And that goes back to that being an independent thinker and being able to think about things without somebody telling you how to think. and also being able to think outside of, because you're going to come into a job and there's going to be processes that no one wants to change. They're going to have done things the same way for the last 10 years, using old technology because nobody knows any better. And those are your constraints. They're very real and they're very difficult to change. But I think that going to grad school really does give you some different problem-solving skills that not a lot of other people have. And so, but that goes back to, I mean, I'm promoted to a senior position after a year and a half, which doesn't happen very often. And I do think that directly is impacted by my ability to solve problems without anyone asking me to, and honestly using rhetoric to get what I want, because right, it's all about context, it's all about audience, it's all about timing, and learning those things in the classroom in a really theoretical way has finally started. I finally started to see the benefits of that. For example, I implement design guide, but we have to get our managers buy-in. And so I realized that we had put together like a list of 10 tasks that we wanted our managers to take care of. Well, if you give them the list, they'll throw it in the garbage. But using my visual design and information design background, I was able to almost make sort of like an infographic that they could quickly digest. And because of that, we were able to get them to agree to these certain tasks. And I think that's directly comes from learning that in a classroom. I mean, it's taken a long time to finally see, to make those connections for myself, to say, okay, yeah, I can go back to, Kylie will get Charlie Castelnick's visual design class and say, I can read a graph, and that's why I can create one that other people will be able to understand. And so I will say, I don't think, if you're an undergrad and thinking about it, be very sure that you want to go, and be very sure of what you want to study, because like I said, I thought I knew why I wanted to go, and then I got there and was like, I don't really want a PhD, and it was difficult to want to continue doing it when I wasn't really sure what the goal was. And so that would just be my biggest advice, is if you're thinking about it, is just to really think about whether you know, because you can always go back, and a lot of times corporate companies, large companies will pay tuition. And so I know a lot of times that you're getting pushed to go immediately, and that's great if you want to do, but it's also really good to get some good real work experience and then decide what you want to go back for. So yeah, that's kind of what I've prepared. Thank you for listening to me. Do you guys have any questions or anything else you want to ask me?
I'm good. I think we got most of the questions out a minute ago.
Yeah. Anybody online?
Nope.
I suppose they're still a minute behind, huh?
Nothing online.
Alrighty. I think we are all good, but I will certainly follow up if anybody comes up with something later. Are you? Alright, thank you, Janna. Alright, we'll let you get home.
Yes, I normally take the bus, but I drove today, and we'll see how the traffic is. So.
Good luck.
Alrighty. I will close it out here, and I will talk to you in a minute. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Why you hang up on her while she was saying bye? Bless you.
Bless you. Thanks for holding the sneeze until after.
I was holding it.
Alright, well, sorry about some of that wireless or the internet cutting out. I hope you were able to catch everything that she said.
That was on.
I didn't know. Either way, though, if you do have questions or want to follow up with something, I have her contact information. I can give that to you guys. I'm going to do a couple of things regarding business before we head out. We have just a few minutes here. One, old business. Did anybody come up with any other ideas or hear about any other ideas for programming events that we can do this year? Throwing that out there, I'll probably ask every time we meet, just in case something comes up or you heard about something.
professional development committee is thinking about having not a networking essentially event, but more like a resume critique kind of day, where, and I meant to talk to you about it, I think I've mentioned it to you, but having more local and like writers come in and interface with students. So that's on the docket. We'll see whether it happens this semester, more than likely next semester.
Okay.
But we'll be in touch.
Is there a general interest from STC? Yes. Okay. We'll make sure you mention it. Anything else pop up, or you run into anything in your classes? Or... I don't mean to like.
Mean to
Okay.
What?
What?
How many seniors are in here?
3.
How's the job hunt going?
It's going.
It's going.
It's happening.
Is there anything that we could do, either the department proper or STC, to help you with your job search?
The resume building help.
Okay. Kristen, Jacob, anything else?
I was just thinking like resume, but also cover letter and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we want to help you guys. I know it's a tough time. I don't want you guys to feel like you're alone trying to do your thing.
A lot of
Building
times just
the,
trying to find stuff is kind of hard.
Yeah.
it's been building the writing.
Have you guys been getting those emails on the listserv?
Yes.
Okay.
The ones for internship options.
Yes. Yes.
And we have some on the STC website as well.
Just adding some content. One of them is for your boys Diebold up there. They're getting an internship in the spring, so you might be able to hook some people up.
Yeah, you want to go talk with Rick Anderson and Bernard Nana Sigamani?
But yeah, so one of the internships is actually David's worked for this company, and they have an internship that's over this.
You want to talk about networking?
Yeah, and their internships are pretty nice.
Yeah, they'll pay for housing. The salary's pretty nice.
It's in Ohio.
It's in Ohio. Cost of living isn't that bad, but
We're gonna
Canton, so a little bit south of North Canton.
Well, there you go. Look at that.
It's a little south of Cleveland. Nice little area, pretty quiet, but close enough to Cleveland if you wanted to do something. So, if you're interested, let me know, and I'll get in touch with them and see what they're looking for.
Professional networking.
All right. Well, then a couple other things in new business. First of all, there is the regional tech competition being hosted right now. A couple other chapters are hosting this. If you are interested or know of anything that you might consider submitting, I am down and putting together an submission form for it. So to compete or to, I guess, enter the contest, by November 15th, we just have to submit some sort of great tech comm example. So if you feel that like, oh, maybe we have a perfect assignment in our classes that we've been doing, or you notice that somebody's doing something really excellent around campus or at your job, we can put together a submission, kind of form an ad hoc committee and get that sent off.
Who's we?
STC.
So it's the chapters that submits?
I think, yeah, specifically it's targeting chapters, but I haven't seen anything.
Who can enter?
about who couldn't also contribute. You might work as a team individual or on behalf of a colleague, but we would,
Do it as a chapter?
sure.
Okay.
Not mainstream. But of course, though, if you'd like to do this, I can put the links up on the WordPress site. You can find it there. They're looking for material regarding instructional material. Support, promotional, or informational material.
Dope.
So, if you run across any of that, there are some prizes.
Is it money?
Like what?
I would say, I know it was on here somewhere.
Yeah, do you get more money for swag?
No.
Damn. Is it actually?
Oh, it was on here a minute ago. Let me give it back to you.
Was it a cash prize?
I don't.
If it's a chapter, you come back and pizza party,
Yeah, pizza party.
but not like Little Caesars.
Alright,
Whatever.
second thing on new business is that there is the JR Gold Award for Excellence in Teaching being hosted right now by SCC. And so if we want to nominate anybody for being an excellent professor in TechCom who also is a member of STC, we can put forth a nomination as a chapter as well. Was some discussion among the executive board about a couple people that we might think could get this award, but also wanted to open it up in case you ran into anybody in your classes. We nominate them and then they put forth their documentation, their acceptance stuff. We threw around Craig there. He's our faculty advisor. He's been a member of STC for like 20 years. And he's been on the board there, and he's also one of the authors of the textbooks that we use in the course here, the TechCom classes. I've never had him as a teacher though, so I don't really know how far that goes.
Yeah, Jack.
I mean,
I'll put Kelly up there.
yeah.
Kelly.
Well, we didn't know her affiliation with STC. Is she still a member, or has she been a consistent member?
I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna
That
say
was
Craig's
what-
the obvious choice because we know he's an STC
Exactly.
member. We're just not sure what other professors are STC members.
That's the problem is we don't know Kelly's
but-
affiliation.
We do, as letter C, I don't want to steal your thunder, Kylie, we do have a new Facebook suggestion box that we can get your suggestions for nominees in.
Yes. I don't know how long it will take me to log into Facebook.
The question is, do you remember your password?
A fruit taste would too, man.
My stomach's kind
Stop
of hurting
it,
from eating that
fine.
pineapple.
Do what?
Yeah, I'll say it later.
Still much messed up from that pineapple.
I ate one piece behind it. Okay.
Sweet with pepper in the fridge all yesterday.
I have to set up the phone to show this. Yes, so then to follow up with that, if you think of somebody later, if you log on to our Facebook page, our public page, and on the left-hand side it says submission box, you can just submit anonymously or not to me. Somebody you would recommend for that.
What's the
Following that though, then there is the updated jobs and internships link on our blog. So the English department page keeps one, but we also keep one that's very specifically targeted towards TechCom. So right now these are the job categories that we have available. We'll be adding that and updating that within the week here as well.
What's the URL for the blog again?
What?
The URL for the blog.
TTU-STC.wordpress.com. So if you're interested or on the job market right now, this is a great place to look for specific jobs related to TechCom. Jack collates these for us, and so he's done a nice job of picking ones that are definitely in Texas, but then also looking for outside of Texas if you're thinking maybe you want to.
And I just found, these are all jobs. I did find a bunch of internships that will be coming on the new update as well if you're not looking for jobs necessarily. But perhaps internships for the spring or summer 2018.
Thanks a lot, Jack.
You got it, Jake.
So to piggyback off of that, we will again have NI visiting us in October, and they're always coming here to recruit. So if you don't see something here, maybe start looking into National Instruments and prepare something for our next meeting as far as questions or whatever.
I think they're also coming to my class.
Who are they?
Yeah, to
They're
talk
also
about.
coming to the-
So, if you'd like to sit in on that, where they talk about their writing styles, their style guides, et cetera, then you're more than
we'll
welcome
have
to.
a very specific style guide.
Do we know when their application closes for they have a spring and summer, right?
Yes. I haven't seen anything new come across my stuff yet, but I think it's out traditionally by the end of October.
I thought I saw it open now.
I just want
Open,
everybody
yes.
closed, that way we can give people enough time before the meeting. We're meeting them closer to the
Mm-hmm.
What was the blog address again?
Oh, yeah. TTUSTC.
It's cut off up there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Just the project.
TTUSCC.wordpress.com.
Yes.
You got it.
Another, it's like classified ads just for TC jobs and internships.
So that's kind of all I have as far as official business goes. If there are any comments or good of the order type things, we can talk about those now. Get at it.
You got that suggestion box up there.
Yes.
Where is that?
It's in the left-hand menu. I can only.
So when you're like on the page, like where it says like about and all this stuff on the left hand side,
I have to
there's like a little thing that says like comment box, and you click on it and you can put in your comments.
You can make it anonymous.
And you can make it anonymous.
Right, it's anonymous,
Been-
and we checked it, and it worked.
Been
So,
tested.
I was like, here, I have to do a code generator in order to log in when I'm not on my personal.
Kid tested. It's mother approved.
Who's the mother?
Man face, but
Do you think the speaker series tomorrow will be useful to people who are thinking about going to graduate school?
Sure.
You're all welcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here's this STC public page, not the group, the public page. The suggestion box is right here underneath
right
home.
there next to it.
If you click on that, you can fill this out, and you may optionally leave your name and email, but certainly you don't have to. If you think of somebody you'd like to nominate, or if you're interested in putting together a submission for the competition, or just generally things that you want to see us do, we'll pilot these and make actionable items out of them.
Roger.
Cool. So tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
there is a speaker series where the professors from our department are going to come talk about their research. If you are academic tracked,
We're thinking about it even.
or thinking about it, it might be useful to come out and network with some of the professors that we have here and kind
And
of
grad
see what,
students.
And grad students. Tomorrow.
Um,
People show up.
yeah, and see what they got going on as far as research goes. That would be at 11 a.m. room 357. Cool. If you didn't sign in, make sure you do so. Otherwise, grab some water and fruit. Have a great weekend.
Oh, for the record, tomorrow we're gonna have Red Bulls. He has Red Bulls. Yeah, he's gonna be the one.
All right, good deal.
Just putting it out.
All right, stream, we're closing you out. Thank you so much for joining us.